The rain hammered down on the cracked pavement of the Sunset Boulevard gas station like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces that seemed to mirror how my world had just shattered. I stood there, soaked to the bone, watching the taillights of my husband's BMW disappear into the storm, taking with them not just my ride home, but apparently everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 20 minutes earlier, Rob Henderson had looked me straight in the eye and said, "Amanda, I think we need some space. This isn't working anymore." Then he'd driven off, leaving me stranded 40 miles from home with nothing but my purse, ID, broken umbrella, and the devastating realization that the man I'd loved for 8 years had just discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. But what Rob didn't know, what nobody in his entitled family knew, was that Amanda Rodriguez wasn't the helpless little wife they all thought I was. And the phone call I was about to make would change everything. The fluorescent lights of the gas station convenience store buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I stood dripping in the doorway, trying to process what had just happened. My phone showed 17 missed calls from work, 3 texts from my brother Carlos asking if I was okay, and absolutely nothing from my husband of 8 years who had just abandoned me in a rainstorm. "Ma'am, you all right?" The teenage clerk behind the counter looked concerned, probably wondering if I was about to track water all over his freshly mopped floors or have some kind of breakdown in aisle 3. "Fine," I managed, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just waiting for the rain to ease up." The truth was, I had nowhere to go and no way to get there. Rob had insisted we only needed 1 car for our romantic weekend getaway to Riverside County. What a joke that had turned out to be. The romantic part lasted exactly until we'd checked into our hotel room, and he'd gotten a call from Vanessa Kim, his so-called business partner at Henderson Construction. I should have known something was wrong when he started taking calls in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones about project deadlines and urgent client meetings at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. I should have trusted my instincts when I caught him deleting text messages faster than a teenager hiding something from their parents. But I'd been foolishly, naively hopeful that this weekend might actually repair the growing distance between us. Instead, it had ended with Rob announcing over dinner at an overpriced steakhouse that our marriage was no longer sustainable and that he needed freedom to pursue new opportunities. Corporate speak for wanting to sleep with his business partner without the inconvenience of divorce paperwork, apparently. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment, though that stung like salt in an open wound. It was the casual cruelty of it all. The way he'd finished his steak, paid the check, and then informed me that I could figure out my own way home because he had prior commitments that evening. When I'd pointed out that we were 40 miles from home in a thunderstorm, he'd simply shrugged and said, "There's a gas station across the street. You can call someone." Someone. As if I had a whole network of people just waiting to drop everything and rescue me from my husband's abandonment. As if the isolation that had crept into our marriage over the past 2 years hadn't systematically cut me off from most of my friends and support system. Rob had been subtle about it, of course. He was too smart to outright forbid me from seeing people. Instead, it was always inconvenient timing. My college friends wanted to meet for drinks. Rob had already made dinner reservations. My brother, Carlos, invited us to his daughter's birthday party. Rob had a client emergency that required my support. Slowly but surely, my social circle had shrunk until it basically consisted of Rob's family, Rob's business associates, and the occasional, polite conversation with neighbors. Now, standing in a gas station at 9:30 on a Friday night, I realized just how effectively I'd been isolated. My brother Carlos lived 3 hours away and worked night shifts at the hospital. My closest friend from college, Patricia, had moved to Seattle last year. My parents were on a cruise ship somewhere in the Mediterranean. probably asleep and completely unreachable. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone who might be able to help, and felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This was exactly the kind of situation Rob had always swooped in to handle, making me feel simultaneously grateful and helpless. Car trouble? Rob would call his mechanic, lost at an unfamiliar location. Rob would navigate, emergency at work. Rob would know exactly what to do. Except now Rob was the emergency, and he was nowhere to be found. The rain continued its relentless assault on the gas station's metal roof, creating a drumbeat that seemed to echo the pounding of my heart. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see other travelers hurrying between their cars and the store, everyone focused on getting where they needed to go. Everyone except me, apparently. I pulled up my banking app, hoping against hope that I could at least afford a taxi or rideshare service for the 40-mile journey home. What I found there made my blood run cold. Our joint checking account, which had contained nearly $3,000 that morning, now showed a balance of $47.32. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the recent transactions. $2,000 withdrawn from an ATM in downtown Riverside at 4:47 p.m. Right around the time Rob had excused himself to make a quick business call while I was getting my nails done for our romantic dinner. He'd cleaned out our account before abandoning me. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born from relationship frustration. This was calculated, premeditated abandonment. The teenage clerk was watching me with growing concern as I stood there staring at my phone, probably looking like someone who was about to either faint or start screaming. I managed a weak smile and moved toward the coffee station, buying myself time to think while I poured a cup of what looked like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. My credit card had been mysteriously declined at dinner, something Rob had smoothly covered while making a joke about bank computer glitches. Now I understood why. He'd probably canceled or maxed out all our cards as part of his escape plan. $47 wouldn't even cover a taxi to the next town, let alone get me home. I could try calling the police, but what crime had actually been committed? A husband leaving his wife at a gas station wasn't exactly grand theft auto. It was just cruel and humiliating. I found myself thinking about my grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, who had raised 5 children as a single mother after my grandfather died in a construction accident. She used to tell me stories about times when she had to choose between paying the rent and buying groceries, how she'd learned to be resourceful and tough because nobody else was going to save her. "Mia," she'd say in her accented English, "never depend on a man so much that you forget how to depend on yourself. Men can disappoint you, but your own strength never will." At the time, I'd thought her advice was outdated, a relic from a generation when women had fewer options. Now, standing in a gas station with $47 and no way home, I realized she'd been trying to prepare me for exactly this moment. The bell above the convenience store door chimed as another customer entered, shaking rain from their jacket. I glanced up automatically and felt my heart skip a beat. The man who'd just walked in was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of controlled precision that suggested military training. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and his brown eyes swept the store with the systematic attention of someone accustomed to assessing threats. More importantly, I recognized him. Marcus Thompson had been coming to Henderson Construction's holiday parties for the past 3 years. Always polite but somewhat separate from the main crowd. Rob had mentioned him occasionally as someone who provided security consulting for their higher-end residential projects, protecting wealthy clients during construction phases when their homes were vulnerable. What Rob had never mentioned, and what I'd only learned through casual conversation at last year's Christmas party, was that Marcus was a former Marine who'd transitioned into private security work after completing multiple tours overseas. He was the kind of person rich people hired when they needed protection, but wanted to maintain the illusion that they didn't need protection. Marcus spotted me almost immediately, his professional gaze taking in my soaked clothing, distressed expression, and the fact that I was standing alone in a gas station at nearly 10 o'clock on a Friday night. His expression shifted from polite recognition to genuine concern. "Mrs. Henderson?" He approached carefully, maintaining respectful distance while clearly assessing the situation. "Are you all right? Is there some kind of emergency?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern by someone who actually seemed to care about the answer, nearly broke my composure entirely. I felt tears threatening and took a shaky breath before responding. My husband and I had a disagreement. He left me here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Even as I said it, the word sounded pathetic. A disagreement. As if Rob abandoning me was equivalent to a spat about restaurant choices. Marcus's expression darkened slightly, and I saw something shift in his demeanor. The polite social mask fell away, revealing someone who was clearly unimpressed with my husband's behavior. "He left you here? In this weather?" There was no judgment in his voice toward me, but plenty of disapproval for Rob's actions. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Marcus glanced toward the windows where rain was still sheeting down, then back at me. "Where do you need to go?" "Home, Pinewood Hills. But I don't. I can't." I gestured helplessly at my phone, unable to articulate that my husband had not only abandoned me, but had also systematically sabotaged my ability to get home safely. Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly processing not just what I was saying, but what I wasn't saying. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to know that your answer will remain completely confidential. Are you in any kind of danger? Is there any reason you can't or shouldn't go home tonight?" The question surprised me. Most people would have simply offered a ride or suggested calling a taxi. Marcus was thinking like a security professional, considering possibilities that wouldn't occur to civilian minds. "No," I said quickly. "Nothing like that. Rob isn't. He's not violent. He's just—" I struggled to find words that would capture the casual cruelty of what had happened without sounding like I was making excuses for him. "Selfish," Marcus finished quietly, and apparently lacking in basic decency. Something about the way he said it, matter of fact rather than sympathetic, steadied me. This wasn't pity, this was professional assessment. "I can give you a ride home," he continued. "No strings attached, no expectation of explanation or gratitude. Sometimes people need help, and tonight you need help." I stared at him, torn between relief and the ingrained hesitation that Rob had spent years cultivating in me. Don't trust strangers. Don't accept help from people without understanding their motives. Don't make decisions without consulting him first. But Rob wasn't here. Rob had forfeited any right to influence my decisions when he'd driven away and left me stranded. "Thank you," I said simply. "I would appreciate that very much." Marcus nodded and glanced toward the clerk. "I'm just going to grab some coffee for the road. Take your time finishing whatever you need to do." It was a small gesture, giving me space to collect myself without feeling rushed or pressured. But it spoke to a level of consideration that I hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time Rob had thought about my comfort or emotional state when making a decision? As Marcus moved toward the coffee station, I caught my reflection in the store's security mirror. I looked exactly like what I was. A woman who'd been abandoned in the rain by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. My carefully styled hair was plastered to my head. My makeup had run in dark streaks down my cheeks. And my dress, which I'd chosen that morning to look attractive for my husband, now clung to me like a soggy second skin. But there was something else in my reflection, something I hadn't seen in years, a spark of anger. Not the quiet, internalized frustration that had become my constant companion, but genuine, righteous fury at being treated so callously. Rob had miscalculated. He'd assumed that abandoning me would leave me helpless and desperate, probably hoping I'd come crawling back with apologies and promises to be more accommodating. Instead, he'd given me something I hadn't had in years: clarity. For the first time in our marriage, I was making a decision entirely for myself, without considering Rob's opinion, approval, or convenience. And the decision I was making was to accept help from someone who was offering it freely, without conditions or expectations. Marcus returned with 2 cups of coffee, offering me one with the same casual competence he seemed to approach everything with. "Ready when you are," he said simply. As we stepped back out into the storm, I realized that this moment, as awful as it was, might actually be the beginning of something better. Rob thought he was ending our story by leaving me at that gas station. He had no idea that he was actually just setting the stage for a very different kind of ending than he'd planned. Marcus's truck was a black Ford F-150 with tinted windows and what looked like reinforced panels along the sides. As he opened the passenger door for me, I noticed the interior was immaculately clean and organized, with a police scanner mounted on the dashboard and a tablet secured in a custom holder. Everything about the vehicle spoke to someone who took their work seriously and was always prepared for unexpected situations. "Seatbelt," he said as he climbed into the driver's seat, not in a commanding way, but with the automatic concern of someone accustomed to thinking about safety first. The engine started with a reassuring rumble, and within moments we were pulling out of the gas station parking lot into the storm. The ride began in comfortable silence, with Marcus focusing on navigating the rain-slicked roads while I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar landmarks blur past in the darkness. It wasn't until we'd been driving for about 10 minutes that he spoke again. "Mrs. Henderson, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long has this been going on?" The question caught me off guard. "This? The way your husband treats you." His voice was carefully neutral, but there was an undertone of professional assessment that made me realize he'd been observing more than I'd thought during those holiday parties. I turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dashboard lights. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I've been doing security work for a long time. Part of my job is reading people, understanding family dynamics, recognizing when situations aren't what they appear to be on the surface." He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Your husband has a pattern of behavior that's concerning." "Concerning how?" I found myself asking, though part of me already knew what he was going to say. "Isolation tactics, control mechanisms, the way he positions himself as the solution to problems that he's often created." Marcus's voice remained professional, but I could hear the disapproval beneath it. "At the Christmas party last year, I watched him interrupt you every time you started talking to someone new. Then he'd smoothly redirect the conversation back to himself or steer you away from whoever you were speaking with." The observation hit me like a physical blow because it was so accurate. I'd never really noticed the pattern before. But now that Marcus had pointed it out, I could see dozens of instances where Rob had done exactly that. "He also has a habit of undermining your confidence," Marcus continued. "Little comments that sound supportive on the surface, but actually chip away at your sense of competence. I heard him tell 3 different people at that party that you were too trusting and needed him to keep an eye on things for you." I stared at him in shock. Those conversations had happened, but I'd been across the room each time, talking to other guests. The fact that Marcus had been paying attention, had recognized the pattern for what it was, made me feel simultaneously exposed and validated. "You were watching me," I said, not accusingly, but with curiosity. Marcus nodded without embarrassment. "Part of my job is threat assessment. That includes identifying potential domestic situations that could escalate into security concerns for my clients." He paused, then added more quietly, "But it was also personal." You reminded me of my sister before she got the help she needed to leave her abusive marriage." The word abusive hung in the air between us like a live wire. I wanted to protest, to explain that Rob had never hit me, never threatened physical violence. But as I opened my mouth to defend him, I realized I couldn't actually defend his behavior tonight. Abandoning your wife 40 miles from home in a storm wasn't exactly the action of a loving, supportive partner. "It's not. He's not violent," I finally managed. "Abuse doesn't have to be physical to be devastating," Marcus replied gently. "Financial control, emotional manipulation, isolation from support systems, these can be just as damaging as physical violence. Sometimes more so, because they're harder to recognize and harder for others to understand." We drove in silence for several more minutes while I processed what he'd said. The rain had lessened slightly, but the windshield wipers continued their rhythmic sweeping, counting out the seconds as I tried to reconcile this new perspective with the narrative I'd been telling myself about my marriage. "Marcus," I said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you telling me this? You barely know me, and this isn't really your business." He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its professional neutrality. "Because 3 years ago, my sister called me from a gas station at 2 in the morning. Her husband had left her there after an argument, taken her purse, her keys, her phone. She was calling from the payphone outside, crying so hard I could barely understand her." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I drove 4 hours to get her, and on the way home, she told me it was the first time she'd realized that what was happening to her wasn't normal. That being abandoned like that wasn't something she deserved. The parallel was so obvious it took my breath away." "What happened to her?" "She filed for divorce 6 months later. It took another year to finalize because he fought her on everything, tried to claim she was mentally unstable, attempted to turn their kids against her. But she got through it, and now she's married to someone who actually treats her like a partner instead of a possession." I found myself imagining that kind of life, a relationship where decisions were made together, where problems were solved as a team rather than one person controlling all the solutions. It seemed almost fantasy-like after 8 years with Rob. "Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said as we turned onto the highway that would take us to Pinewood Hills, "I'm going to say something that might sound presumptuous, but I want you to know that I'm saying it from experience, not judgment." I nodded for him to continue. "Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do about your marriage, you need to start thinking about protecting yourself financially and legally. Men like your husband don't just abandon their wives on a whim. They plan these things. And if he's willing to strand you in a storm, he's probably willing to do a lot worse when it comes to divorce proceedings." The word divorce sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my rain-soaked clothes. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud, making it real instead of just a terrible possibility lurking in the back of my mind. "I don't know anything about divorce," I admitted. "I don't even know where I'd start." "You start by documenting everything," Marcus said firmly. "Tonight's abandonment, the financial sabotage, any other incidents you can remember. You get copies of all your important documents. You secure your own bank account that he can't access. And you talk to a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. He cleaned out our account." Marcus glanced at me with something that might have been approval. "You're already thinking more clearly than most people in your situation. That's good. And there are options for women in your position. Legal aid, pro bono services, lawyers who work on contingency." As we entered Pinewood Hills, I directed him through the winding streets to the house Rob and I had shared for the past 5 years. It was a beautiful home in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place that looked perfect from the outside. As we pulled into the driveway, I realized that was probably an apt metaphor for my entire marriage. Marcus put the truck in park, but didn't turn off the engine. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to give you my card." It has my personal cell phone number on it. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need help, immediate help, day or night, you call me. No questions asked, no explanations required. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a simple black business card with white lettering, Marcus Thompson, Security Consulting, followed by a phone number and email address. I can't pay you, I said, taking the card but feeling obligated to be honest about my financial situation. I'm not asking you to. Consider it a professional courtesy. His expression was serious but kind. And Mrs. Henderson? What happened tonight wasn't your fault. Men who abandon their wives in storms don't do it because their wives weren't good. Enough. They do it because they're cowards who can't handle adult conversations about adult problems. I felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't entirely from sadness. There was relief mixed in, the profound relief of having someone acknowledge that what had happened to me was wrong, that I didn't deserve it. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in years. For the ride, for listening, for... I gestured helplessly, unable to articulate how much his kindness had meant. For treating you like a human being who deserved basic respect? Marcus asked with a slight smile. That shouldn't be noteworthy, but I understand why it feels that way. I climbed out of the truck and hurried through the rain to the front door, fishing my keys from my purse. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I turned back to wave goodbye, but Marcus was still sitting in the driveway, clearly waiting to make sure I got inside safely. It was such a small gesture, but it represented a level of consideration that felt almost foreign after years of Rob's casual indifference to my well-being. The house was dark and empty, exactly as we'd left it that morning when we'd departed, for our doomed romantic weekend. I turned on lights as I moved through the rooms, noting details I'd somehow never paid attention to before. How few of my personal belongings were visible in the common areas. How all the artwork and decorative choices reflected Rob's preferences rather than mine. How the house felt more like a showcase than a home. In our bedroom, I kicked off my wet shoes and started to peel off my soaked dress when I noticed Rob's side of the closet was mostly empty. His favorite suits were gone, along with his expensive watch collection and the leather overnight bag he used for business trips. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision made in anger. He'd been planning this departure probably for weeks. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, Marcus's business card still clutched in my hand, and tried to process the full scope of what had happened. Rob hadn't just abandoned me tonight. He'd been systematically preparing to abandon our entire marriage, while letting me believe we were working on our relationship. The romantic weekend had been a setup, a convenient way to get me out of town while he finished his preparations. The argument at dinner had been orchestrated, giving him an excuse to leave me stranded while he went off to start his new life with Vanessa. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking it might be Rob with an explanation or apology. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. This is Marcus. Just wanted to make sure you made it inside safely. Remember what I said about documenting everything? And get some rest, you've had a traumatic day. The simple message of concern was so different from anything I'd received from my husband in months that it made me cry again. Not the desperate, panicked tears from earlier, but something deeper and more cathartic. I spent the next hour walking through the house with my phone, taking pictures of Rob's empty closet, the missing items from his home office, the cleaned-out garage space where he'd kept his golf clubs and tools. Marcus was right about documentation. If Rob was planning to claim this was a sudden decision, the evidence of his premeditation might be important later. In his desk drawer, I found something that made my blood run cold. Printouts of our joint bank account statements going back 6 months, with specific transactions highlighted in yellow. Rob had been tracking our spending patterns, identifying when I typically checked our accounts, probably planning the timing of his financial sabotage down to the hour. There was also A folder labeled VK Personal that contained what appeared to be apartment listings, insurance quotes, and vehicle registration paperwork. Vanessa Kim's new life with my husband, meticulously planned while I'd been trying to save our marriage. The cruelest part was finding a draft email in his computer's trash folder, apparently meant for me but never sent. It was clinical and cold, outlining his decision to pursue other opportunities, and suggesting I consider this a chance for personal growth and independence. There was no acknowledgement of love lost, no expression of regret, no recognition that 8 years of marriage might warrant more than a corporate-style termination notice. But there was something else in that email draft that caught my attention. A reference to necessary financial adjustments to ensure a clean separation. Rob wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to leave me with nothing. I screenshot everything I could find, emailing the images to a new Gmail account I created specifically for documenting what Marcus had called my case. It felt strange to think of my marriage as a case, but I was beginning to understand that's exactly what it was going to become. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overtook my adrenaline, and I crawled into bed wearing one of my old college t-shirts. The sheets smelled like Rob's cologne, a scent that had once been comforting, but now seemed cloying and oppressive. I made a mental note to wash everything tomorrow, to start the process of reclaiming this space as my own. As I lay in the dark, listening to the rain finally subsiding outside, I thought about Marcus's sister calling from a gas station payphone at 2 a.m. I thought about all the women who'd found themselves stranded, abandoned, betrayed, by men they'd trusted with their hearts and their futures. But I also thought about the fact that Marcus had driven 4 hours to help his sister, that he'd driven 40 miles tonight to help me, that there were people in the world who believed women deserved better than abandonment and cruelty. For the first time in years, I fell asleep thinking not about what I'd done wrong or how I could fix my marriage, but about what I was going to do next. Rob thought he'd left me with nothing, but he'd actually given me something invaluable. Clarity. About who he really was, and more importantly, who I could become without him. The last thing I remembered before sleep took over was Marcus's voice saying, "Sometimes people need help, and tonight you need help." Tomorrow, I was going to start helping myself. Saturday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the bedroom windows, as if the storm had washed away more than just the previous day's humidity. I woke with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years, my mind already racing with tasks that needed to be accomplished. The emotional fog that had characterized the last few years of my marriage seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sharp focus. That surprised me. My first call was to Patricia Walsh, my former college roommate who had become a family law attorney in downtown Los Angeles. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, exchanging Christmas cards and the occasional social media comment, but I'd never reached out to her professionally. Now, dialing her number at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, I felt both desperate and determined. "Amanda Rodriguez?" Patricia's voice was warm but curious when she answered. "This is an unexpected pleasure. How are you doing?" "Not well. Actually, Patricia, I need legal advice, and I need it quickly. My husband abandoned me last night, cleaned out our bank accounts, and I think he's been planning to leave me for months while pretending to work on our marriage." The silence on the other end lasted only a few seconds before Patricia's voice returned, now sharp and professional. "Are you in immediate physical danger?" "No, nothing like that. But I found evidence that he's been systematically preparing to divorce me while keeping me completely in the dark about his plans." "Okay, first things first. Are you at your home right now?" "Yes." "Good, don't leave. I'm coming to you. This conversation needs to happen in person, and we need to secure some things before he comes back and tries to take whatever he left behind." Patricia arrived an hour later, looking every inch the successful attorney in her weekend casual, wear of designer jeans and a blazer. She carried a leather briefcase and a tablet, and her expression was all business as I let her into the house. "Show me everything," she said, without preamble. For the next 2 hours, I walked Patricia through the evidence I'd discovered. The cleaned-out closet, the missing personal items, the financial records showing months of planning, the email draft outlining his strategy for leaving me with nothing. She photographed everything, made detailed notes, and asked questions that I hadn't even thought to consider. "Amanda, this is actually good news," she said as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing what we'd documented. "Good news?" I stared at her in disbelief. "How is any of this good news?" "Because your husband made a critical error. He documented his premeditation. In California, marriage is a partnership, and partners aren't allowed to secretly prepare for divorce while deceiving their spouse about their intentions. What he's done is called dissipation of marital assets, and it's grounds for him to be held financially responsible for far more than he probably realizes." Patricia opened her tablet and showed me a complex chart outlining California's community property laws. "Everything acquired during your marriage belongs to both of you equally. That includes his business interests, his retirement accounts, any property purchases, and yes, any money he's hidden or spent preparing for this departure." "But he cleaned out our accounts. I have $47, which was illegal. A spouse can't unilaterally drain joint accounts without the other spouse's knowledge or consent, especially not when they're planning to file for divorce. We're going to get that money back, plus damages." Patricia's smile was sharp and confident. "Trust me, I've handled dozens of cases like this. Men who think they can outsmart the legal system by planning their departures always leave trails of evidence that end up destroying them in court." Over the next hour, Patricia outlined a comprehensive strategy for protecting my interests. First, we needed to freeze all remaining joint accounts and credit cards to prevent further financial sabotage. Second, we needed to establish my own banking relationships at institutions where Rob had no connections. Third, we needed to file for legal separation immediately to stop the clock on any additional dissipation of assets. "What about Henderson Construction?" I asked. "Rob's family business. He's always said it's not worth much, that they struggle to stay profitable." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Amanda, I did some quick research while driving over here. Henderson Construction was awarded a $40 million contract with the state of California last year for courthouse renovations. Their annual revenue is in the 8-figure range. If Rob has been telling you the business isn't valuable, he's been lying to you about that too." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. For years, Rob had insisted we couldn't afford certain luxuries because the construction business was unpredictable and cash flow was always tight. Meanwhile, he'd apparently been earning more money than I'd ever imagined. How do we prove what the business is actually worth? Forensic accounting. We'll subpoena their books, bring in experts to evaluate their contracts and assets. It's going to be expensive, but based on what you've shown me, we're going to recover far more than it costs." Patricia leaned forward, her expression intense. "Amanda, I need you to understand something. Your husband isn't just leaving you. He's been systematically defrauding you for years. The money you thought wasn't there? It was there. The financial security you thought you didn't have? You did have it. He's been stealing from you while making you believe you were lucky he was supporting you." The scope of the deception was staggering. I thought about all the times I'd felt guilty for wanting things we couldn't afford, all the career opportunities I'd passed up because Rob convinced me we needed to be financially conservative, all the times I'd apologized for spending money on necessities. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of what lay ahead. "Now you fight back, and you start by calling your brother Carlos and asking him to come stay with you for a few days. You shouldn't be alone right now, both. For emotional support and for safety reasons." "Safety? I told you, Rob isn't violent." Patricia's expression was grave. "Amanda, men who systematically plan to financially destroy their wives aren't stable individuals. When he realizes you're not going to roll over and accept whatever scraps he's willing to throw you, his behavior could escalate. I've seen it." happened too many times. The thought of Rob becoming dangerous seemed impossible, but then again, 24 hours ago, I would have said it was impossible for him to abandon me at a gas station. Clearly, I'd been wrong about a lot of things. After Patricia left with promises to file the necessary paperwork first thing Monday morning, I called Carlos. My older brother had always been protective of me, and when I explained what had happened, his reaction was immediate and fierce. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Amanda, I'm leaving for your place right now. Don't let anyone in the house until I get there." "Carlos, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. This isn't just about Rob anymore. You're about to start a legal war with a family that has money and connections. You need someone in your corner who can't be bought or intimidated." While I waited for Carlos to arrive, I found myself thinking about Marcus's business card, still sitting on my nightstand where I'd left it the night before. His advice about documentation had already proven invaluable, and I wondered what other insights he might have about dealing with situations like this. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself dialing his number. "Marcus Thompson," he answered on the second ring. "Marcus, this is Amanda Henderson, from last night. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all. How are you doing today?" "Better, actually. I took your advice about documentation, and I've already spoken with a lawyer. But I wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind." "Of course." "You said men like Rob don't abandon their wives on a whim, that they plan these things. What else should I be watching for? What other tactics do they typically use?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him considering how much to tell me. "Mrs. Henderson, are you somewhere private where we can talk freely?" "Yes, I'm at home alone." "Okay. Based on what you've told me and what I observed about your husband's behavior, here's what you should probably expect. First, he's going to try to come back and get more of his belongings, probably when you're not there. Second, he's going to attempt to turn mutual friends and family members against you by controlling the narrative about why your marriage ended. Third, he's going to try to make you feel crazy by denying things that actually happened or claiming you're remembering them wrong. Each prediction felt like a bullet point in a manual I never wanted to read. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've seen it dozens of times. Narcissistic abuse follows predictable patterns. The abandonment last night was designed to break you down emotionally and make you desperate enough to accept whatever terms he offers. When that doesn't work, they escalate to other tactics. My lawyer thinks he might become dangerous. Your lawyer is smart. I'm not saying he will become physically violent, but you should be prepared for the possibility. More likely, he'll try to sabotage your car, your credit, your reputation, anything he can use to maintain control over the situation." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus outlining practical security measures I could take. Change the locks immediately. Install security cameras. Vary my routines. Trust my instincts if something felt wrong. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why are you helping me? I mean, really, you barely know me." He was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Henderson, in my line of work, I see a lot of people who have power and a lot of people who don't. Most of the time, the people with power use it responsibly. But sometimes, they use it to hurt people who can't fight back. When I see that happening, I have a choice. I can look the other way, or I can level the playing field. And you're choosing to level the playing field for me. I'm offering you the same thing I'd offer any person in your situation: information, resources, and backup if you need it. What you do with those things is entirely up to you." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone and marveling at the difference between Marcus's approach and everything I'd experienced with Rob. Marcus offered help without conditions, shared information without expecting anything in return, and respected my autonomy while still providing support. It was a completely different model of how men could interact with women, and it made me realize just how dysfunctional my marriage had been. Carlos arrived that afternoon with 2 suitcases and a grim expression. My brother was 6'2", broad-shouldered from years of hospital work, and had inherited our father's protective instincts when it came to family. He took one look at me and wrapped me in a bear hug that nearly made me cry again. "You look tired, Hermana," he said, using his childhood nickname for me. "But you also look stronger than I expected." "I feel stronger," I admitted. "Angry, but stronger." "Good. Anger is useful if you channel it correctly. Now show me what this pendejo did to you." I walked Carlos through the same evidence I'd shown Patricia, watching his expression grow darker with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes, processing what he'd learned. "Amanda, I have to ask you something, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way. But how did you not see this coming? I mean, some of these signs seem pretty obvious from the outside." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since the previous night. Because it happened gradually, and because he was really good at making me doubt my own perceptions. Every time I questioned something, he had a reasonable explanation. Every time I felt uncomfortable about his behavior, he made me feel like I was being paranoid or oversensitive. Carlos nodded slowly. "Classic gaslighting. I see it sometimes with patients who are in abusive relationships. The perpetrator systematically undermines the victim's confidence in their own judgment until they become completely dependent on the abuser's version of reality." "I'm not a victim," I said, more sharply than I'd intended. "No, you're not. Not anymore. But you were being victimized, and there's a difference. Recognizing what happened to you doesn't make you weak. It makes you informed." That evening, we ordered pizza and sat in my living room planning my immediate next steps. Carlos would stay through the week to help me deal with whatever chaos Rob's return might bring. Patricia would file the legal separation papers Monday morning and begin the process of freezing Rob's access to marital assets. I would start looking for my own apartment, somewhere Rob didn't know about, where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. "What about your job?" Carlos asked. I'd been working part-time as a freelance graphic designer, mostly for small local businesses, but my income was irregular and far from sufficient to support myself. "I'll have to build my client base back up." Rob discouraged me from taking on bigger projects because he said they were too stressful and took time away from our marriage. But I'm good at what I do. I can make it work. "Of course you can. You're a Rodriguez. We don't quit and we don't let anyone keep us down." As we talked, I found myself thinking again about Marcus's insights into Rob's behavior patterns. The prediction about him trying to control the narrative was already proving accurate. I'd received several text messages from mutual friends, asking if everything was okay, because Rob had apparently been calling them to share his version of our mutual decision to separate. "He's telling people we decided together to take a break," I told Carlos, showing him the messages. "Typical. Get ahead of the story, make himself look reasonable, position you as equally responsible for the situation." Carlos's expression was disgusted. "You should respond to these messages with the truth. Don't let him control the narrative." I spent the next hour crafting carefully worded responses to our mutual friends, explaining that Rob had unilaterally decided to end our marriage and had abandoned me at a gas station with no way to get home. I kept the messages factual rather than emotional, but I made sure the truth was clear. The responses I received were uniformly shocked and supportive. Several people mentioned that they'd sensed something was wrong in our marriage, but hadn't known how to bring it up. Others shared their own experiences with divorce and offered practical advice about lawyers, housing, and emotional support. "Look at that," Carlos said, reading over my shoulder. "You have more support than you realized. Rob probably convinced you that you were isolated, but you're not. People care about you." He was right. For years, Rob had subtly discouraged me from maintaining close friendships, claiming that our marriage should be sufficient for all my social needs. But the messages I was receiving proved that people hadn't forgotten about me. They'd just been waiting for an opening to offer help. As the evening wore on, I felt something shifting inside me. The helpless desperation from the night before was being replaced by a calm determination. Rob had underestimated me, assumed that 8 years of gradual conditioning had made me completely dependent on him. But he'd miscalculated. I wasn't the same naive 23-year-old who'd married him. I was 31, educated, talented, and surrounded by people who believed in me. More importantly, I was finally seeing the situation, clearly without the distortion of his manipulation and gaslighting. "Carlos," I said as we prepared for bed, "I think Rob made a serious mistake leaving me the way he did." "How so?" "He thought it would break me down, make me desperate to get him back. Instead, it woke me up. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly about who he really is and what I actually want from my life." Carlos smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. "There's the sister I remember. Rob Henderson has no idea what he's unleashed." As I lay in bed, that night I thought about Marcus's words about leveling the playing field. Rob had all the advantages: wealth, family connections, business relationships, legal resources. But he also had something that was going to work against him: arrogance. He was so confident in his superior position that he'd documented his own misconduct, left evidence of his planning, and underestimated my ability to fight back. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, I fell asleep feeling like I had a chance to win. Monday morning arrived with an urgency that felt electric. Patricia had scheduled an emergency hearing for temporary financial relief, and I found myself standing in the courthouse at 9 in the morning, wearing my most professional outfit, flanked by my brother Carlos, and feeling more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. The family court building was intimidating, all marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo like a gunshot. Patricia met us in the hallway outside the courtroom, her expression confident but serious. "Rob's attorney just arrived," she said quietly. "Jonathan Blackwood from Blackwood and Associates. He's expensive and aggressive, which tells us two things. Rob has more money than he claimed, and he's taking this seriously." Through the courtroom windows, I could see Rob sitting at a table with a distinguished man in an expensive suit. My husband looked calm and composed, every inch the successful businessman in his tailored clothing. When he saw me, his expression shifted to one of practiced sadness, as if he were the wounded party in this situation. "Don't let him get to you," Patricia murmured. "Everything he does from this point forward is performance designed to manipulate either you or the judge. Remember what we discussed about staying focused on facts." The hearing itself was unlike anything I'd imagined. Judge Margaret Chen was a stern woman in her 50s, who clearly had no patience for theatrics. She listened to Patricia present our evidence of financial sabotage and asset dissipation with sharp attention, occasionally asking pointed questions that suggested she'd seen similar cases before. Rob's attorney, Blackwood, attempted to portray the situation as a mutual separation where both parties had access to marital funds. He painted Rob as a generous husband who had always provided for his wife, and suggested that the account withdrawal was simply Rob taking his fair share before departing. Judge Chen cut him off mid-sentence. "Mr. Blackwood, are you seriously arguing that unilaterally draining joint accounts without spousal knowledge or consent constitutes taking a fair share?" "Your Honor, my client was simply protecting assets that he had earned through his business endeavors." "Assets earned during marriage are community property, Counselor. I assume you're familiar with California law?" The judge's tone was ice cold. "Mrs. Henderson, please present your evidence of the defendant's premeditation." Patricia stood and methodically presented the timeline we'd constructed. The months of planning, the systematic removal of personal items, the coordinated financial sabotage, the evidence of a secret relationship. She played portions of the voicemails Rob had left over the past 6 months, where he'd claimed to be working late, but background noise suggested he was in restaurants or social settings. The most damning evidence was the email draft Patricia's forensic expert had recovered from Rob's computer. Reading it aloud in the sterile courtroom environment, with its clinical language about necessary adjustments and clean separation, made Rob sound like a corporate executive downsizing a department rather than a husband ending a marriage. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Chen addressed Rob directly, "did you or did you not withdraw approximately $3,000 from joint accounts on the same day you abandoned your wife at a gas station 40 miles from home?" Rob's attorney tried to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I want to hear from your client directly, counselor." Rob stood, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the charm that had originally attracted me to him. "Your Honor, my wife, and I had been having difficulties for months. I felt that some time apart would be beneficial for both of us to evaluate our relationship. The financial arrangements were simply practical considerations." "Mr. Henderson, that wasn't my question. Did you or did you not withdraw $3,000 on Friday evening and then abandon your wife at a gas station in Riverside County?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Rob off guard. I watched him calculate his response, probably weighing the risks of lying to a judge against the damage of admitting the truth. "I did withdraw funds from our account, yes, and my wife and I did have a disagreement that resulted in her needing alternative transportation home." "Alternative transportation," Judge Chen repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "At a gas station, in a rainstorm, 40 miles from home, after you had removed her access to marital funds." The silence that followed was deafening. Rob's attorney was furiously taking notes, probably calculating how much damage control would be needed after this hearing. Judge Chen's ruling was swift and comprehensive. All remaining marital assets were to be frozen immediately pending full forensic accounting. Rob was ordered to return the withdrawn funds within 72 hours and was prohibited from disposing of any marital property without court approval. I was granted exclusive use of the marital home and awarded temporary spousal support of $4,000 per month. Most importantly, the judge ordered immediate discovery proceedings for Henderson Construction, including full financial records, contracts, and partnership agreements dating back 5 years. As we left the courthouse, I felt simultaneously victorious and terrified. Rob had looked genuinely shocked by the judge's orders, as if he'd expected his attorney's reputation and his own charm to carry the day. Instead, he'd been systematically dismantled by a judge who clearly recognized manipulative behavior when she saw it. "That went better than I expected," Patricia said as we walked to her car. "Judge Chen has a reputation for not tolerating financial abuse. The discovery order is going to reveal exactly how much money Rob's been hiding from you." Carlos was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Did you see his face when the judge ordered him to return the money? I thought he was going to have a stroke." Over lunch at a small cafe near the courthouse, Patricia outlined what would happen next. The forensic accounting process would take several weeks, but would provide a complete picture of Henderson Construction's finances and Rob's personal assets. In the meantime, I was legally protected from further financial sabotage and had enough support to begin rebuilding my independence. "Amanda, I need to warn you about something," Patricia said as we finished our meal. "Rob's going to be furious about what happened today. Men like him don't respond well to losing control, especially not in such a public way. You need to be extra careful over the next few weeks." Her warning proved prophetic. That evening, as Carlos and I were reviewing apartment listings online, my phone rang with a call from Rob. I answered on speaker so Carlos could hear the conversation. "Amanda, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Rob's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "My business partners were in that courtroom. My reputation is going to be destroyed." "Your reputation should be destroyed," I replied calmly. You abandoned your wife and stole marital assets. What did you expect would happen? I didn't steal anything. That money was mine to begin with. Actually, it wasn't. Judge Chen made that pretty clear. Rob's tone shifted, becoming the manipulative sweetness I recognized from years of arguments. Honey, listen, we both made mistakes. But this legal nonsense isn't going to solve anything. Why don't we meet somewhere quiet and talk about this like adults? We can work something out without involving lawyers and judges. Carlos was shaking his head vigorously, and I could see why. Rob was trying to isolate me again, get me away from my support system so he could work his psychological manipulation without witnesses. No, Rob. Any communication between us needs to go through our attorneys from now on. Amanda, you're being unreasonable. I know you're hurt, but destroying my business isn't going to make you feel better. Think about what you're doing to my family, to my employees. The guilt tripping was so obvious that it almost made me laugh. I'm not destroying anything, Rob. I'm simply ensuring that marital assets are properly accounted for. If that's a problem for your business, maybe you should have thought about that before you started planning your secret departure. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Rob cycling through anger, manipulation, and false promises. He claimed he wanted to work things out, insisted that Vanessa meant nothing to him, and suggested that counseling could save our marriage. But every word rang hollow because I now understood that this was simply another tactic in his playbook. When I finally hung up, Carlos looked impressed. You handled that perfectly. You didn't get drawn into his drama. You didn't defend yourself against his accusations. And you didn't fall for his manipulation. It's weird, I said. 6 months ago, that conversation would have had me questioning everything, wondering if I was being too harsh, considering giving him another chance. Now I can see exactly what he's doing. That's because you're not emotionally dependent on him anymore. When someone's approval doesn't matter to you, their manipulation loses its power. That night, I found myself calling Marcus again. Something about his calm professionalism helped me process the emotional whiplash of the day's events. How did the hearing go? He asked when I explained why I was calling. Better than expected. The judge saw right through Rob's performance and granted everything my lawyer requested. But now I'm worried about what comes next. You should be. Winning in court often escalates these situations. Has he tried to contact you since the hearing? I described the phone call, and Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before responding. Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time we had a more serious conversation about your security. Are you available to meet tomorrow? There are some things I'd like to show you, and some precautions I think you should consider taking. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my house the following afternoon. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table, with clear sightlines to all the entrances. He'd changed from his casual weekend appearance into what I was learning was his professional uniform. Dark slacks, button-down shirt, and a blazer that probably concealed various security equipment. Before we start, he said as I sat down, I want to be completely transparent with you about something. I've been doing some research into your husband's business relationships, and there are some things you should know. He opened a tablet and showed me a series of financial documents and news articles. Henderson Construction had connections to several development projects that involved questionable permitting processes and suspiciously low-bid contracts. There were allegations, never proven, of bid rigging and political corruption involving city council members and zoning board officials. I'm not saying your husband is involved in anything illegal, Marcus said carefully, but the company operates in some gray areas where the line between aggressive business practices and actual corruption gets blurry. What does that mean for me? It means that if your divorce proceedings expose Henderson Construction to scrutiny, there could be people beyond your husband who have an interest in making sure you don't pursue this too aggressively. The implication was chilling. been thinking of this as a personal battle between Rob and me, but Marcus was suggesting it might involve larger interests with more resources and fewer scruples. Are you saying I'm in physical danger? I'm saying you should be prepared for that possibility. Men who build their wealth through questionable means often have questionable associates, and when their business empire is threatened, they sometimes resort to questionable methods to protect it. Marcus spent the next hour outlining a comprehensive security plan. He recommended that I install a professional security system at the house, vary my daily routines, and maintain communication, protocols that would alert people if I went missing or was threatened. He also suggested that I consider hiring professional protection during high-risk periods, such as court appearances or when meeting with Rob's associates. I can't afford a bodyguard, I said, overwhelmed by the complexity of what he was suggesting. Actually, you probably can. If Henderson Construction is worth what I think it is, your divorce settlement could be substantial enough to justify the expense. And in the short term, there are other options. He explained that he occasionally worked with other security professionals who provided services on a sliding scale for women in dangerous domestic situations. There were also legal precedents for courts to order one party in a divorce to pay for the other party's security expenses if threats were involved. Marcus, can I ask you something, and please be honest with me? Of course. Are you trying to scare me into hiring you? Is this some kind of elaborate sales pitch? His expression was serious but not offended. Mrs. Henderson, if I wanted your business, I'd give you a glossy brochure and a list of references, not warn you about potentially dangerous associates of your husband's business. I'm telling you this because 3 years ago, my sister ignored similar warnings about her ex-husband's connections, and she ended up needing police protection for 6 months. The sincerity in his voice convinced me he was being genuine. What happened to her? Her ex-husband's business partners decided that her divorce settlement would create too much financial exposure for their operations. They tried to pressure her into accepting a minimal settlement by making it clear that pursuing her legal rights could be hazardous to her health. And she hired professionals, documented the threats, and ended up with an even larger settlement plus criminal charges filed against the men who threatened her. But it took courage and resources that not everyone has access to. We talked for another hour about practical security measures and warning signs to watch for. Marcus gave me a small device that looked like a car key fob, but was actually a panic button connected to a monitoring service. If I pressed it, it would immediately alert emergency services and several private security contacts to my location. One more thing, Marcus said as we prepared to leave. Your husband is going to try to negotiate with you directly, probably, through mutual friends or family members who will pressure you to be reasonable and avoid a messy court battle. Don't do it. Whatever settlement he offers privately will be a fraction of what you're entitled to legally. That evening, Carlos and I were cooking dinner when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Diane Henderson, Rob's mother, standing on the front porch with a concerned expression. She was elegantly dressed as always, carrying a small wrapped gift and wearing the kind of smile that had always made me feel slightly inadequate. Don't answer it, Carlos said immediately. This is exactly what Marcus warned you about. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what Rob's family had to say now that their golden boy's behavior had been exposed in court. I opened the door, but kept the chain lock engaged. Amanda, sweetheart, Diane said in her carefully modulated voice. I was hoping we could talk. I brought you some of those cookies you always loved. Hello, Diane. I appreciate the gesture, but my lawyer has advised me not to discuss the divorce with Rob's family. Oh, this isn't about the divorce, dear. This is about family. You've been part of our family for 8 years, and we care about you regardless of what's happening between you and Rob. It was a masterful opening, designed to appeal to my emotions and bypass my rational defenses. 6 months ago, it probably would have worked. Now, having learned to recognize manipulation tactics, I could see exactly what she was doing. That's very kind, but I think it's best if we maintain some boundaries right now. Diane's smile became slightly strained. Amanda, I understand you're upset with Rob, and honestly, some of your anger is justified. But this legal battle you're pursuing is going to hurt a lot of innocent people. Rob's employees, his business partners, even Tyler's college fund could be affected. There it was, the guilt trip about innocent victims. Rob had apparently briefed his mother on exactly which emotional buttons to push. Diane, the only person who put anyone at risk was Rob when he decided to abandon his marriage and steal marital assets. I'm simply protecting my legal rights. But surely you don't need all that money, dear. You're young, you're talented. You'll find someone else and start a new life. Rob has responsibilities, obligations to people who depend on him. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Diane systematically trying every manipulation tactic in the book. She appealed to my sense of fairness, my concern for others, my supposed love for the family, and finally, my fear of what pursuing the divorce might cost me emotionally and financially. When I finally closed the door, Carlos was shaking his head in amazement. That was like watching a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Did you notice how she never once acknowledged that what Rob did was wrong? It was all about how you should sacrifice your interests for everyone else's benefit. She's been doing that to me for 8 years, I realized, making me feel selfish for wanting anything that might inconvenience Rob or the family business. No wonder I lost track of my own needs and priorities. That night, as I lay in bed reviewing the events of the day, I felt a strange sense of completion. The people I'd thought were my family had revealed themselves to be exactly what Marcus and Patricia had predicted, a coordinated team working to protect their interests at my expense. But I also felt something else: determination. Rob and his family had underestimated me, assumed that 8 years of conditioning had made me permanently compliant. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The legal discovery process was going to expose everything they'd worked to hide. And when it did, I was going to be ready to claim exactly what I was entitled to, regardless of how many cookies his mother brought to my door. The forensic accounting results arrived on a crisp Thursday morning 3 weeks later, delivered by Patricia herself, who wanted to see my reaction in person. She spread the documents across my kitchen table with the satisfaction of a detective who'd just solved a complicated case. "Amanda, sit down before you read this," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Because what we've discovered is going to change everything." The numbers were staggering. Henderson Construction wasn't just profitable, it was extraordinarily wealthy. Hidden assets, offshore accounts, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios worth over $12 million. Rob's personal net worth was nearly $4 million, none of which had been disclosed during our marriage. "He's been living like a middle-class businessman while sitting on a fortune," Patricia explained, pointing to account statements and property deeds. "Look at this Arizona ranch, bought for cash 2 years ago. This Miami condo, purchased under a shell company he controls. He's been systematically hiding assets while convincing you that money was tight." But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The forensic accountant had uncovered evidence that Rob had been planning his departure for over 2 years, not the few months I'd originally suspected. Bank records showed regular transfers to secret accounts, investment purchases that excluded my name despite being bought with marital funds, and even a pre-purchased luxury car registered to a company Vanessa Kim had incorporated 6 months earlier. "Amanda, this isn't just divorce fraud," Patricia said, her voice tight with anger. "This is criminal financial abuse on a massive scale. Rob has been systematically stealing from you for years while gaslighting you into believing you were barely getting by." The evidence folder contained photographs of properties I'd never seen, investment statements for accounts I'd never known existed, and financial records showing a lifestyle Rob had been living without me. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, jewelry purchases that certainly hadn't been gifts for me. He'd been living a double life funded by money that legally belonged to both of us. "What does this mean for the divorce?" I asked, still trying to process the scope of his deception. "It means you're going to be very wealthy when this is over. California's community property laws are crystal clear. Half of everything acquired during your marriage belongs to you, including assets he tried to hide. We're talking about a settlement in the millions, plus damages for financial fraud." Over the next few days, the implications of the discovery began to unfold. Rob's attorney requested an emergency meeting, suggesting his client was interested in negotiating a settlement. Translation: Rob had realized his hidden assets were no longer hidden and wanted to minimize the damage. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Patricia's law firm, a sleek downtown office that radiated professional competence. When Rob walked in with his attorney, he looked like a man who'd aged years in the past few weeks. The confident businessman from our courthouse hearing had been replaced by someone who clearly understood he was cornered. "Amanda," he said as we took our seats around the conference table, "I think we can resolve this situation amicably if we approach it reasonably." It was exactly the kind of manipulative opening Marcus had warned me about, designed to frame any demands I made as unreasonable by comparison to his supposedly generous offer. "I'm listening," I said simply, offering no emotional reaction for him to manipulate. Rob's attorney, Blackwood, presented their settlement proposal with all the theatrical gravity he could muster. Rob would return the $3,000 he'd withdrawn, plus an additional $50,000 as a good faith gesture. I would receive the house in Pinewood Hills and a lump sum payment of $200,000. In return, I would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waive any future claims against Henderson Construction or its assets. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked like she was trying not to laugh, while I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "You're offering me $200,000, I said slowly, while sitting on assets worth over $12 million? "Amanda, you have to understand," Rob said, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "Most of those assets are tied up in business operations. They're not liquid. And the company has obligations, employees who depend on their jobs. The same company that's been generating millions in profit while you convinced me we couldn't afford a decent vacation." Rob's facade began to crack. "Look, I worked hard to build that business. I deserve to benefit from my efforts." "With money that legally belongs to both of us," Patricia interjected. "Mr. Henderson, your client seems to be confused about California law. Mrs. Rodriguez is entitled to half of all marital assets, regardless of whether he thinks he deserves them." What followed was 2 hours of increasingly desperate negotiation tactics from Rob's side. They questioned the validity of the forensic accounting, suggested the hidden assets were premarital property despite clear evidence to the contrary, and even implied that I was being unreasonably greedy for seeking my legal share. "Amanda," Rob said during a break in negotiations, approaching me while the attorneys reviewed documents, "this isn't who you are. You're not vindictive or money-hungry. Why are you letting these lawyers turn you into someone you're not?" It was such a perfect example of his manipulation that I almost felt admiration for the skill involved. Reframe my pursuit of justice as vindictiveness. Suggest that standing up for myself meant I was becoming someone unworthy. Imply that his lawyers were corrupt while mine were predatory. "Rob," I said calmly, "the person I'm becoming is someone who doesn't accept being lied to, stolen from, or abandoned at gas stations. If that seems like a change to you, it's because you never really knew me at all." The final settlement negotiations took place 2 weeks later, this time with a mediator present and Marcus quietly stationed in the lobby as a security precaution. Rob's legal position had deteriorated further when Patricia's team discovered additional hidden assets, including a vacation home in Costa Rica and investment accounts in the Cayman Islands. Faced with the prospect of criminal charges for financial fraud, Rob finally accepted reality. The settlement was comprehensive. I received $6 million in assets and investments, the Pinewood Hills house, alimony of $10,000 per month for 5 years, and my legal fees paid by Henderson Construction. Rob retained the IDO business but was required to undergo court-ordered financial monitoring to ensure he couldn't hide assets from future partners. The most satisfying moment came when Rob was forced to publicly acknowledge his misconduct as part of the settlement agreement. In a formal statement read in open court, he admitted to systematically concealing marital assets, financially manipulating his spouse, and abandoning his wife in an unsafe situation. It was the kind of public accountability he'd spent his entire life avoiding. Walking out of the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a profound sense of transformation. The woman who'd been abandoned at a gas station 6 weeks earlier would barely recognize the person I'd become. I was financially secure, legally vindicated, and most importantly, completely free from Rob's psychological manipulation. "How does it feel?" Patricia asked as we stood on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sunshine. "Like waking up after a very long, very bad dream," I said honestly. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me it's not real, that I'm not actually entitled to live my own life on my own terms." Marcus, who had attended the hearing as my security consultant, approached with a satisfied expression. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, using my maiden name which I'd legally reclaimed as part of the settlement. "I think this is the first time I've seen a case where justice was served this completely." "It's only justice because I had help," I replied. "If you hadn't picked me up that night, if Patricia hadn't been willing to take my case, if Carlos hadn't supported me through everything, Rob would have gotten away with all of it." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But the strength to fight back, the courage to reject his manipulation, the determination to see it through, that all came from you. We just provided some tools and guidance." That evening, Carlos and I celebrated at a small Italian restaurant near my house. Over dinner, we talked about the future, about the possibilities that had opened up now that I was free from Rob's control and financially secure enough to pursue any path I chose. "What are you going to do now?" Carlos asked. "Travel? Start? A new business? Buy a villa in Tuscany?" "Honestly, I think I want to help other women in situations like mine. Maybe fund legal aid programs, or work with organizations that help women escape financial abuse. I know how lucky I was to have good people around me when I needed them. Not everyone has that." "That sounds perfect," Carlos said. "Use your experience to help others, and use Rob's money to do it. There's a certain poetic justice in that." 3 months later, I was settling into my new life with a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. I'd moved to a smaller, but more beautiful house in a neighborhood where I actually knew my neighbors' names. My graphic design business was thriving, with clients who appreciated my work and treated me as a professional equal. I'd started volunteering with a legal aid organization that specialized in helping women navigate divorce proceedings. Surprisingly, I'd maintained my friendship with Marcus, who had become both a trusted advisor and a reminder of how healthy relationships were supposed to function. He never tried to control my decisions, never made me feel foolish for my choices, and never suggested that his opinions should override my own judgment. One evening, as we sat on my back patio watching the sunset over the mountains, he asked about my plans for the foundation I was establishing to help women escape financial abuse. "I've been thinking about calling it the Elena Rodriguez Foundation," I said, after my grandmother. She would have loved knowing that her great-granddaughter was using a fortune stolen from women to help other women fight back. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She used to tell me that strength wasn't about never needing help, but about knowing when to accept it and how to use it wisely. Marcus smiled. "Sounds like you learned the lesson." 6 months. After that night at the gas station, I received an unexpected phone call. Rob was in legal trouble again, this time for tax evasion related to his hidden offshore accounts. The IRS had apparently taken interest in Henderson Construction after our divorce proceedings revealed the extent of his financial deception. "He's probably going to face criminal charges," Patricia told me over lunch. "The federal investigators are calling your case a roadmap to his illegal activities. Without your divorce exposing his hidden assets, they never would have known where to look." I felt no satisfaction in Rob's continued downfall, but I did feel a deep sense of validation. The man who had convinced me I was lucky he supported me, who had made me feel guilty for wanting basic financial security, was being held accountable for years of illegal activity. That afternoon, I was in my office working on marketing materials for a small nonprofit when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Amanda? This is Helen Morrison. I was working at the Sunset Boulevard gas station the night you were stranded there. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I saw the news about your divorce settlement and I wanted to tell you something." I remembered Helen, the older woman who had been behind the counter that horrible night. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. How did you get my number?" "Your friend Marcus gave it to me. He thought I should tell you what I saw that night, what I didn't mention when the lawyers were asking questions." "What do you mean?" "Honey, I've been working gas stations for 30 years. I know the difference between someone having car trouble and someone being abandoned. But what I didn't tell anyone was that about an hour before you showed up, a young blonde woman came in asking if we'd seen a man matching your husband's description. She seemed to know exactly when and where to look for him." The implication was clear. Rob and Vanessa had planned even the timing and location of my abandonment, probably choosing the gas station specifically because it was isolated enough to be traumatic, but public enough to avoid any real danger. Even that night, the worst night of my marriage had been choreographed for maximum psychological impact. "Mrs. Morrison, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I wanted you to know that what happened to you was even more calculated than you realized. And I wanted you to know that when I saw you standing there that night, soaking wet and abandoned, I was proud of how you handled yourself. You didn't break down, you didn't beg, you just quietly figured out how to solve your problem. That takes strength, honey." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about that night and everything that had followed. Rob had designed my abandonment to break me, to make me so desperate and humiliated that I'd accept whatever crumbs he was willing to offer. Instead, it had introduced me to people who believed I deserved better, who helped me find the strength to demand better, and who supported me while I built something better. The gas station abandonment, which Rob had intended as the final chapter of my story, had actually been the first chapter of a completely different story. One where I was the protagonist instead of the victim, where I made my own decisions instead of accepting someone else's manipulation, where I used my resources to help others instead of being drained by someone else's greed. That evening, I called Marcus to thank him for connecting me with Mrs. Morrison and to share what she'd told me. "I'm not surprised," he said. "Men like Rob rarely act spontaneously. The cruelty is always intentional, always designed to achieve maximum psychological damage." "It's strange," I said. "Knowing that makes me feel better, not worse. It proves that everything I went through was real, that I wasn't overreacting or being too sensitive." "Amanda, can I tell you something? That night when I picked you up at the gas station, I thought I was just giving someone a ride home. I had no idea I was witnessing the beginning of someone completely transforming their life." "Neither did I thought my life was ending. Turns out it was just beginning." A year later, the Elena Rodriguez Foundation had helped over 200 women navigate divorce proceedings and escape financial abuse. The legal aid programs we funded had recovered millions of dollars in hidden assets for women whose husbands had thought they were too powerless to fight back. Rob, meanwhile, was serving an 18-month federal sentence for tax evasion and financial fraud. Henderson Construction had been sold to pay his legal fees and tax penalties. Vanessa Kim had apparently decided that a man with criminal convictions And no, money wasn't quite the catch she'd thought he was. The transformation was complete. The woman who had once apologized for wanting things her own money could afford was now using millions of dollars to help other women claim what was rightfully theirs. The woman who had been abandoned at a gas station was now the person other. Women called when they needed help finding their way home. And sometimes, when I drove past the Sunset Boulevard gas station on my way to court to support another woman fighting for her rights, I'd remember that rainy night and smile. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Rob had thought he was ending my story that night. Instead, he'd given me the chance to write a completely different ending than either of us had ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.